Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Tom. Good to be here, as always.
Matt, you chose to write a blog post around a pronouncement via X from our fearless leader, President Donald Trump. And I thought it was an excellent way to introduce some discussions about framing risk for compliance. But why don't you start off with the tweet and your blog post and what led you to that blog post?
Sure. So the tweet, as many people might already have heard about, came on Saturday morning when Donald Trump attacked Wal-Mart, because several days prior, Wal-Mart said that because of Trump's tariffs, it was quite possible that Walmart would need to raise prices on consumers sometime later this summer. President Trump, of course, did not like hearing that. So he said that Walmart should basically eat the tariffs. That is exactly what he said, in all caps, by the way. Walmart made billions of dollars last year, far more than expected. Between Walmart and China, they should, as is said, eat the tariffs and not charge valued customers anything. I'll be watching, and so will your customers. End tweet. Walmart has not, to the best of my knowledge, responded to that tweet yet. But Tom, I thought it was interesting because basically Trump is telling Walmart to make less profit and cut consumers a break, which I am not necessarily opposed to in theory, but in practice, my first question was, whatever happened to primacy of the shareholder, which I thought was supposedly the law in this country? And we could spin out a whole lot of corporate governance issues right there just for senior management teams and corporate boards. We probably could also spin out a bunch of more specific corporate compliance and risk management headaches too. I focused more on the boardroom and governance challenges, but this is just yet another example of how Trump is firing off whatever comes to his mind on Twitter or Truth Social or whatever it is, and leaving the rest of us wondering what's going on as he is upending one standard and practice after another.
So, Matt, when I read the tweet, I immediately thought if AOC, Elizabeth Warren, or Bernie Sanders had tweeted that, it would have been howls, cackles, probably requests for lynchings of those three people by the magma hat-wearing right wing that they had interfered with capitalism. So I thought it was interesting from that perspective. But you raised some, I thought, interesting points around stakeholder capitalism in your blog post. And maybe we could walk through some of those because sometimes some good comes out of idiots.
Well,
so why did this tweet raise for you the specter of stakeholder capitalism?
I want to back up for a moment there, Tom. When you said that this tweet could have been something if AOC or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren said it. First off, I could absolutely see that maybe they would say something like this. They probably have. Any or all three of them might have at some point. However, for them, big deal. When they say something like corporate profits are too high, we should do better by consumers, that's Tuesday. Who cares? The difference, however, is none of them are the president, which Donald Trump is, for better or worse. And he has, to my mind, made a rather thinly veiled or maybe even just outright threat of something against Walmart if it does not do this. I don't know if that would be an antitrust investigation for price gouging or maybe some sort of tax inquiry or Lord knows what, but there is clearly the specter raised of presidential harassment, if not outright enforcement, for basically doing something that Walmart is legally entitled to do. I do think presidents have not just the choice, but the duty to threaten corporations that if you break the law, we will harass and enforce you. That's what government is supposed to do to lawbreakers. Raising your prices to cover higher costs is not illegal. And I can appreciate that certainly Walmart probably doesn't want to raise costs. It probably will try some sort of thread the needle where it's going to raise some prices, but not all. And it's going to try to trim some operations elsewhere to preserve profits and maybe argue with its Chinese suppliers. But that is Walmart's choice to make based on what its board and its senior management want to do. And they will decide this is how we are going to cover the cost of these tariffs. just like they would have to cover the costs of any other expense that they might incur. Trump is trying to short circuit that whole thing, that whole process, by barging in and saying, no, I don't want you to have the choice of passing along the higher costs to customers so that you can preserve profits for shareholders. You can't do that. I don't want to see it. I don't like it. You made a whole bunch of money, so now cut consumers a break. That's what he's saying. I don't know that the president realizes what he has done here, but in a roundabout way, he has backed into supporting stakeholder capitalism, which is the idea that there are more than just shareholders who deserve some consideration in corporate decision making. Now, there are more than one other stakeholders. There are shareholders, there are customers, there are your business partners, employees, worker unions, the local community where you do business. We could go on. And this is exactly what people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC have talked about for years. So have a lot of other good governance types. What Trump is getting at opens the door to ESG issues, because thinking about consumers and what they can really afford, and do we already make enough money? Have we already done enough right by shareholders that why don't we just leave some money on the table and cut consumers a break? That's what he's telling Walmart to do. And that is an ESG issue. Now, I think it's kind of weird or ironic that now a Republican is, in fact, voicing support for stakeholder capitalism and ESG issues, because they've never supported that before. It has always been shareholder primacy. But what would that sort of position mean for shareholder primacy, which is the law in the state of Delaware, where Walmart is incorporated? It is also well respected as a principle in corporate law across the country. But if we're going to do that, then why stop there? Why stop at customers? Why not think about what duty does Walmart or any other company owe to the communities where it has a manufacturing plant or a retail center? What about other threats that President Trump might make? What if they start telling tech companies, bring all of your back-end operation centers in India where people work for dollars a day, bring all of that back to the US? Or if you don't, maybe I'm going to be unhappy and I'll investigate you. What would a company do then if the president makes that sort of a tweet, which is not far-fetched, in my opinion, observing how he tweets? So this is where I start to wonder about all of the messy corporate governance implications. And we could keep going, but he has backed into opening a door that has all sorts of directions you could go it through after that. And it's quite a moment.
So I have to note jawboning is a long and well-honored presidential tactic, at least as far back to JFK. But let's play out how this could work, because I'm intrigued, of course, from the legal perspective. And you noted this in your blog post. Shareholder group gets upset because Walmart's profits are less because they have eaten these costs. They bring suit in Delaware or in the great state of Texas, which is going to have its own stock exchange, where Texas has enshrined the business judgment rule. And the court says, oh no, business judgment. Walmart made a judgment and they were willing to take less profits. What was that business judgment of? To satisfy the president, to represent or take into account other stakeholders. So I can actually see this as the start of a legal dialogue about stakeholder capitalism. And then you even you rabbit trailed this puppy to death all the way down into corporate compensation. So where do you see that as an issue as well?
Think about this. You can certainly take the precedent that Trump is trying to establish here, and he probably is not even aware that's what he's doing, but it is what he's doing. So corporate finance theory, I will not bore listeners with all of this. If you really want to know about it, go get a textbook or go take a class. But corporate finance theory 101 says, and this has been demonstrated and proven, that a company's share price is a reflection of expected future earnings. So if Walmart eats the cost of the tariffs and profit margins are less, that means profits in the future, earnings potential in the future are less, which means the share price goes down, which is the basic unit of compensation for most senior managers now. You get equity-based comp. So if you do what the president wants you to do, you will wind up with a depressed share price in the future, and your equity pay is going to be worth less in the future. Or, to put it another way, management right now has a financial incentive not to do what the president wants. They're going to ignore him, pass these costs on to shareholders. They preserve the profit margins. Net earnings are still high. Share price keeps going up. Their equity comp is worth more money. But by the way, they've now pissed off the president. And Tom, I don't think what Trump here is jawboning. I don't think that's what he's doing. I think it is clear that he is threatening people. He has already taken vindictive actions against other institutions. Clearly, everybody is reading between the lines of his tweet, such that it is, and they're wondering, what will he do to me if I say no? That's not the same as telling somebody, you really should do this. This is very clearly, I expect you to do this or else, and I have a lot of authority as vested in me as power of the president. So how do we square these things where right now, at least, executive pay is designed and structured that they have a real financial incentive to tell the president, no, I don't want to do it? Is that in the shareholders' interests? Is it in the company's interest? What if he decides to crucify Walmart? He's probably not going to, because Walmart is big, but he could crucify other companies, smaller ones that aren't necessarily as big and public as Walmart. That's why I say that President Trump is trying to create, or not even trying, accidentally, inadvertently creating a very slippery slope around what shareholders might be able to sue him for, or not him. What would shareholders be able to sue Walmart for? Are we incentivizing management to act in ways that are in their own self-interest, but not the company's or not the president's, or what's in whose interest? We don't know, because Trump has just fired this off. I am confident he has not thought through the consequences or the implications of what he's asking companies to do. But that is what's happening here.
I absolutely agree. He hasn't thought through the consequences, but the thing that struck me, perhaps in the largest 30,000-foot view of your blog post, Matt, was I'm going through lots of discussions around what is risk. And did Walmart have a tariff risk on its radar? Perhaps not. Did it have a risk of being threatened with criminal prosecution by the president if it did anything based upon that tariff risk? Maybe not. But you have got to now be prepared, because everything you've just discussed has to be a discussion at the very highest levels of Walmart, maybe even up to the board right now. And so how are you as a company going to prepare for risks that you 3 weeks ago or 2 months ago were inconceivable?
I don't have a good answer for that, but I think that points to the fundamental problem here is the arbitrary nature of what Donald Trump wants to do. We have to remember this is not a disciplined man. A lot of people think he's mentally unstable. I am one of those people. I'll wear that on my sleeve. I don't think he's a very intelligent man. He's coming up with contradictory policies all the time, and they're not policies, really. They're just contradictory urges that he expresses in 140 character tweets or 280 or whatever the limit is these days. And the rest of us are left to pick up the pieces. So back to the question you said, does Walmart have some sort of risk management plan to think through tariffs? I am confident they absolutely do. They've had to pay tariffs for already. Tariffs are not a new thing. They're a large and sophisticated company, and many others also think through how would we manage tariffs. Do they have a plan for what are we going to do when the president wakes up one day and is in a bad mood and saw something on the news he didn't like or had a bad golf game or whatever, and he's going to take it out on my business now? Probably not, because how do you have a risk management plan for something that is inherently unpredictable and unstable? We should all remember, Tom and I, for listeners, we are recording this on Monday. It looks like the Trump has already moved on to threatening investigation of Bruce Springsteen. Maybe this thing from Walmart will come to nothing. Maybe he'll forget all about it and he'll pursue Springsteen instead. I don't know how you would deport Bruce Springsteen when he was literally born in the USA and sang the song, but whatever. So I don't know what to make of this, but companies can't ignore it. However, the fundamentally arbitrary and unpredictable nature of what Trump wants to do is at the heart of this. And there are tremendous implications. I think we ignore all of it at our peril, but I don't know the right way to pay attention to it.
That's why I'll go the other direction and think that companies need to be prepared and need to be thinking about completely arbitrary, completely capricious, and completely unpredictable because, as we've seen in the first 3 months of the Trump administration, it's a daily event.
You could say something like, what are the hills your organization is willing to die on? And that is something I've thought about a bit because I live down the street from Harvard University, which is currently facing really an almost existential threat or level of harassment from the Trump administration for, I'm not even quite clear anymore. But the administrators at Harvard have clearly said, we absolutely cannot cave in to all of Trump's demands because they will utterly transform what Harvard is, right down to how it teaches, what it teaches, who it can admit, who decides what it will teach, who decides what students it will admit and whatnot. Harvard is going to wind up spending, unfortunately, obscene amounts of money to defend itself. I do hope that they will prevail. But ultimately, you have to think through as a company, what are we willing to die on? Because this is who we are as a business. And what are your corporate values and priorities? That's a question every company is going to have to answer for itself. And how you actually die on the Hill is something we don't really have much visibility into. How much are you going to fight this? How much are you not? Funny thing is, as much as I stand in Harvard's corner, Harvard has been willing to negotiate on and agree with a lot of what Trump supposedly wants, but he just keeps demanding more. So there's a peril here in giving in to Trump's demands. If you're an organization that does, he's going to demand more and then more and more. And so what do you do? And I don't have a good answer for that. Ultimately, you have to think through, how are we going to be ready to defend ourselves? How are we going to be able to defend the choices we make to all of our stakeholder groups? If Wal-Mart did decide to eat the tariffs, how would they explain that to shareholders? If Wal-Mart decided to pass along the cost of tariffs, how would they explain that to customers? If Walmart zigzags back and forth, how are you going to explain that to employees who just want to know what they're supposed to do? But what they're supposed to do changes every week. I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think I have depicted the immense complexity that is facing large organizations these days, and I don't know when that's going to end.
I don't think you have to go so far as to pick the hills you're going to die on. I do think you have to go so far as to have a very robust risk management strategy that can literally respond to anything on a moment's notice. But with that, Matt, I can't wait to see what next week brings us.
Thank you, Tom.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.